The grand marble columns of the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., loomed over the buzzing crowd outside. News vans lined the street as reporters eagerly anticipated yet another high-profile corruption trial. But what they didn't know was that today would mark an unprecedented turn of events. One that would shake the very foundations of the American judicial system. Inside the courthouse, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, a relentless force against corruption, stood tall in her tailored navy suit. She had spent the past few months meticulously building a case against Judge Martin Kessler, a man whose reputation had long been cloaked in respectability. Behind the scenes, however, Bondi had uncovered a staggering trail of judicial bribery, obstruction of justice, and collusion with powerful corporate entities. Judge Kessler sat at the bench, his piercing gaze sweeping over the courtroom. To the public, he was an esteemed judge, but to Bondi, he was a man who had betrayed his oath for personal gain. She had watched for too long as he manipulated rulings, favored the wealthy, and crushed whistleblowers under the weight of his influence. But today, all of that would change. Bondi took a deep breath and turned toward Assistant U.S. Attorney Brian Keller, her most trusted ally in the case. "It's time," she whispered. Keller nodded and approached the prosecution's table, setting down a thick binder filled with evidence. The defendant in today's case was Douglas Fenton, a mid-level businessman accused of massive corporate fraud. But Bondi knew the real criminal wasn't just Fenton. It was Judge Kessler himself. As the hearing commenced, Kessler maintained his usual authoritative demeanor. "Proceed," he commanded, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. Bondi rose from her seat. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking against the floor. "Your Honor, before we proceed with the trial of Douglas Fenton, the prosecution has a motion to file, one that concerns the integrity of this court." A murmur spread through the gallery. Kessler's expression remained neutral, but Bondi noticed the slight twitch of his fingers as he clasped them together. "And what motion is that, Attorney General?" he asked, his voice carefully measured. Bondi locked eyes with him. "We have uncovered compelling evidence that this court has been compromised. Specifically, we have proof that you, Judge Kessler, have engaged in unlawful activities that have directly influenced multiple cases, including this one." A collective gasp filled the room. The defense attorney, clearly unprepared for this revelation, adjusted his glasses and turned to his client, who looked equally stunned. Kessler let out a dry chuckle. "I suggest you be very careful with your words, Ms. Bondi." "I always am," she shot back, "which is why we have documents, financial records, and eyewitness testimony proving that you have accepted bribes, manipulated evidence, and obstructed justice. And, Your Honor, this evidence has already been submitted to the Department of Justice for immediate review." Kessler's face paled. The courtroom fell into dead silence. For the first time in his career, Judge Martin Kessler realized he was no longer in control. A sharp silence suffocated the courtroom as every pair of eyes fixated on Pam Bondi. Even the seasoned defense attorneys, usually accustomed to courtroom theatrics, sat frozen in disbelief. Judge Martin Kessler, however, did not move. His lips pressed into a tight line, his fingers curling slightly over his gavel. But Bondi saw it, the slightest twitch in his left eye, the way his breathing quickened. He was caught off guard. "Ms. Bondi," Kessler finally said, his voice carrying a forced calm, "this is an outrageous accusation. And I find it highly inappropriate for you to level such a charge against a sitting judge in the middle of an unrelated trial." Bondi's expression remained impassive. "This is not inappropriate, Your Honor. This is justice." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Reporters, their hands flying over keyboards, were already composing headlines. U.S. Attorney General accuses judge of corruption in live courtroom drama. Kessler exhaled sharply. "Very well. Since you seem so confident in your accusations, present your so-called evidence." Bondi signaled to Brian Keller, who promptly stood and handed a thick folder to the bailiff. "These documents contain bank transactions linking you to offshore accounts, Your Honor," Bondi said coolly. "Accounts that received large deposits within days of critical rulings in favor of corporate interests." The bailiff carried the folder to Kessler. The judge hesitated for a split second before opening it. His eyes skimmed the contents, and for the first time his practiced composure cracked. A single bead of sweat trickled down his temple. We also have signed testimonies, Bondi continued, pressing forward, from whistleblowers who worked under businessmen that funneled money into those very accounts, bribing you in exchange for favorable decisions. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Kessler slammed the folder shut. This is absurd, he thundered. Fabricated lies. Bondi didn't flinch. Would you care to explain, then, why forensic accountants were able to trace direct links between your ruling history and these deposits? Or why several high-profile cases that seem to have clear legal standing, were mysteriously dismissed under your watch? Kessler's jaw tightened. His fingers flexed around his gavel, but he did not strike it. He knew that would only emphasize his desperation. The courtroom doors suddenly swung open. 3 FBI agents in dark suits stepped inside, their expressions unreadable as they made their way toward the prosecution's table. The lead agent, Special Agent Marcus Riley, approached Bondi and handed her a folder. Madam Attorney General, Riley said in a firm tone, as per your request, the Department of Justice has expedited the review of Judge Martin Kessler's financial dealings. A federal warrant has now been issued for his immediate arrest. The tension in the room escalated. The air crackled with anticipation. Bondi turned back to Kessler, her blue eyes locked onto his. Judge Kessler, you are officially under investigation for bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. You will step down from that bench immediately. For the first time, Kessler seemed truly rattled. His hands trembled slightly as he glanced toward the defense attorney's table as if seeking an ally. But no one moved to help him. Instead, Special Agent Riley took a step forward, his hand hovering over his belt. Your Honor, please stand up and come with us. Kessler let out a dry, humorless laugh. This is madness, he muttered under his breath. But he knew there was no escape. Not in front of a packed courtroom. Not in front of dozens of cameras. Slowly, Judge Martin Kessler rose to his feet. But Bondi wasn't finished yet. She took a step forward, ensuring that her voice carried across the courtroom. This is only the beginning, she announced. For too long, corruption has thrived in the shadows of power. But today, the American people see the truth. And the truth is that no one, no matter how high their position, can escape justice. The room erupted in gasps and whispers as the FBI agents closed in. Kessler's fate was sealed. But just as Riley reached for the handcuffs, something unexpected happened, something that no one, not even Bondi, had anticipated. Kessler lunged for the gavel, his eyes wild with desperation. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom as Judge Martin Kessler lunged forward, his fingers wrapping around the wooden gavel with a desperate grip. His movements were frantic, his face contorted with fury. Enough of this nonsense, he bellowed, slamming the gavel down with a deafening crack. This court is adjourned. I refuse to be part of this politically motivated circus. His voice reverberated off the marble walls, but no one moved. No one obeyed. The bailiff, a heavy-set man with years of courtroom experience, instinctively reached for his holster, as did the FBI agents who had been closing in on the corrupt judge. But Kessler wasn't armed, at least not in the traditional sense. His weapon was his authority, and for the first time in his life, it was slipping away. Pam Bondi, however, stood firm. She had seen desperate men before, powerful men who thought they were untouchable only to crumble when their misdeeds caught up with them. Judge Kessler, she said in a level voice, your authority here is over. Kessler's chest rose and fell rapidly, his grip tightening on the gavel. You think you can just humiliate me like this? I am a federal judge. I have ruled over hundreds of cases. My word has shaped the laws of this country. And now you want to tell me that I am nothing. Pam took a slow step forward, her presence unwavering. Your word is meaningless when it's bought and sold like a commodity, she said. The American people deserve a judicial system that serves them, not the highest bidder. The courtroom was silent, save for the frantic scribbling of reporters and the hum of cameras rolling. The entire nation was watching. Special Agent Marcus Riley stepped forward again, this time more assertively. Judge Kessler, you are under arrest for bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. You will comply peacefully, or additional charges will be added. Kessler's lips trembled. He looked around the room, searching for anyone who would come to his defense. His fellow judges were not present. His powerful allies were conspicuously absent. The very corporations that had funneled millions into his offshore accounts had already distanced themselves, their PR teams likely working overtime to spin the situation. He was alone. Bondi watched the realization dawn on him. You're finished, she said simply. Kessler's shoulders slumped. The fight left his body, and the weight of his crimes finally settled on him. Click. The unmistakable sound of handcuffs snapping shut rang out as Special Agent Riley and his team restrained the disgraced judge's wrists behind his back. As the FBI agents escorted him down the aisle, the press went into a frenzy, flashing cameras illuminating his ashen face. Some people in the gallery whispered in shock, while others clapped softly, a rare moment of public justice unfolding in real time. Kessler turned his head, his eyes locking onto Bondi's one final time. "You think you've won?" he muttered. "You think the system isn't still rigged?" Pam Bondi took a deep breath. "I don't think justice is perfect, but I do know that today it worked." Kessler scoffed, shaking his head as he was led out the door. As soon as he was gone, the courtroom erupted into a mix of cheers and commotion. Reporters scrambled to file breaking news reports. Defense attorneys whispered among themselves, likely questioning past cases Kessler had presided over. Pam Bondi turned to Brian Keller, who exhaled heavily. "That was insane," he said. "We just brought down a federal judge in his own courtroom." Bondi allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "And we're just getting started." Because Kessler wasn't the only corrupt official in Washington. There were more. Many more. And she was going after all of them. The moment Judge Martin Kessler was hauled out in handcuffs, the courtroom descended into chaos. Reporters flooded toward the exits, desperate to broadcast the breaking story. Camera flashes flickered like lightning, illuminating the stunned faces of lawyers, court clerks, and legal officials who had just witnessed history. But Pam Bondi remained composed. She wasn't here for theatrics, she was here for justice. She turned to Brian Keller, her right-hand prosecutor. "We need to lock down every case Kessler has presided over in the last 10 years. If he was compromised, that means hundreds of wrongful verdicts could be on record." Keller nodded. "Already on it. I'll have a team comb through his rulings by morning." Pam's mind raced. This wasn't just about Kessler, he was part of something much bigger. For years, she had suspected that corruption ran deep in Washington's judicial system. Judges, politicians, corporate executives all entangled in a web of backroom deals and payoffs. Kessler's arrest was just the first domino to fall. The press conference outside the courthouse was immediate. Pam Bondi stepped up to the podium, the iconic Department of Justice seal gleaming behind her. A sea of microphones pointed in her direction, journalists shouting over each other to get a question in. She raised a hand. "One at a time," she said firmly. A reporter from the Washington Post fired first. "Attorney General Bondi, what can you tell us about Judge Kessler's arrest? Will additional charges be filed?" Pam took a measured breath. Judge Martin Kessler was arrested today on multiple counts of bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Our investigation has uncovered evidence that he accepted financial incentives in exchange for manipulating court rulings. This is a gross violation of the public's trust, and he will be held accountable to the full extent of the law. Another journalist from CNN jumped in. "Are you saying this corruption is widespread? Could more judges be involved?" Pam's gaze was unwavering. The Department of Justice is conducting an extensive probe. Anyone found to have abused their position will be prosecuted, no exceptions. The crowd buzzed with energy. A scandal of this magnitude had the potential to reshape the judicial system. Then came the next question from a New York Times correspondent. "Attorney General Bondi, critics claim this could be politically motivated. What do you say to those who argue that targeting a sitting judge is a partisan move?" Pam's eyes narrowed. She had anticipated this question. "This is not about politics," she said with absolute conviction. "This is about corruption. It does not matter if someone is a Democrat or a Republican, a judge or a politician. If they are guilty of breaking the law, they will face consequences. Period." The journalists scribbled furiously, knowing this moment would be quoted in headlines across the country. As Pam stepped away from the podium, Keller leaned in. "We just put every corrupt official in Washington on notice." Pam nodded. "Good." But she knew the battle was just beginning. Because someone somewhere had enabled Kessler's corruption. And she intended to find out who. As Pam Bondi stepped away from the podium, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the caller ID Director James Whitaker, head of the FBI. She answered immediately. "Tell me you have something." Whitaker's voice was tense. "Bondi, we just cracked open something much bigger than Kessler." Pam's pulse quickened. "Go on." "We dug into the offshore accounts Kessler was using to launder his bribes," Whitaker explained. "And guess what? Those accounts aren't just his. They're linked to multiple judges, politicians, and high-level executives across the country." Pam's grip on the phone tightened. "You're telling me this isn't just about one corrupt judge?" "No," Whitaker said grimly. "This is a nationwide operation." Her mind raced. It all made sense now. Kessler wasn't the mastermind, he was just a pawn in a much larger scheme. Someone, somewhere, had been pulling the strings, ensuring that certain cases were won or lost at the highest levels of government and business. Who's at the top of this? Pam asked. Whitaker hesitated. We're still untangling the money trail, but one name keeps surfacing. A corporate lobbying firm in D.C. called Vanguard Strategies. Pam felt a chill. She knew that name. Vanguard Strategies was a high-powered lobbying group with ties to some of the most influential politicians and corporations in the country. If they were involved, this corruption didn't just touch the courts. It infected the entire system. I need everything you have on them, Pam said, her voice steely. Already sending files to your secure server, Whitaker confirmed. But be careful, Bondi. This kind of exposure makes enemies. Powerful ones. Pam exhaled slowly. She had been in politics long enough to know that taking down a judge was one thing. But going after an entire network of corruption? That was dangerous. She ended the call and turned to Brian Keller, who had been watching her closely. What's wrong? He asked. We just found out Kessler was the tip of the iceberg, she said. This goes higher. Much higher. Brian's eyes widened. Are you saying? I'm saying we're about to take on the most powerful figures in Washington. A tense silence settled between them. Then Brian squared his shoulders. So what's the next move? Pam glanced at the courthouse behind her, where just hours ago, she had put a corrupt judge in handcuffs. She wasn't stopping now. We go after them all, she said. Every judge, every politician, every executive who thinks they're untouchable. We build the case and we bring them down. Brian nodded. This could change everything. Pam allowed herself a small smile. That's the plan. As the sun set over Washington, D.C., Pam Bondi knew that the fight had only just begun. But she wasn't afraid, because today had proven one undeniable truth. No one was above the law.